Hello, my name is Aisling Conlon, and I'm the Marketing Manager for the UK Advertising Exports Group, or UKAEG as we call it for short. Our aim is to support the international growth of the UK advertising and marketing services. I believe the creative industries offers the greatest opportunity to mobilise positive action for the planet. The UK creative industry is leading a global charge against climate change, uniting the industry to make a positive environmental impact and inspiring audiences to act for a sustainable future. At UK Advertising, we have a number of initiatives, such as Ad Net Zero, the programme to get UK advertising to real net zero by the end of 2030. We also have Ad Green, which was launched in September 2020 with two clear aims: to measure advertising production carbon footprints, allowing project teams to understand which activities have the biggest impact, and to empower the industry to reduce emissions and move to zero carbon, zero waste. This year, we have all heard that it has been a year unlike no other for brands, and we have seen a shift in consumer behaviour that has been accelerated due to COVID-19. Consumers are increasingly aware of their role in driving change and are keen to live sustainably. Today, I am delighted to be joined by our expert panellists to discuss how consumer behaviour change may have affected the Marketeers Toolkit.
Hi, my name's Amy. I'm the founder and CEO of Goodloop. Goodloop is a purpose-powered advertising platform. We distribute ads programmatically across premium publishers, and if people choose to engage by giving a little bit of their precious time and their precious attention, then they unlock a free donation funded by the advertiser, and they can choose a charity or good cause to give it to. So we work with brands from McDonald's to H&M to Unilever, helping them deliver on their purpose through their media in collaboration with their consumers.
Hi, I'm Jane Usher. I'm the Chief Exec and founder of 23Red. We're a creative agency. We set up 20 years ago, very much with purpose as an integral part of the business. But in the last 10 years, it's absolutely become front and central to everything that we do. We deliver marketing solutions that change behaviour for the better across a very broad range of topics, from inclusivity, diversity, sustainability, the environment, health, well-being, and many more, across government, for charities and for brands.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Walsh. I'm one of the co-founders of Digital Detox. We are a design and technology agency based in London. Everything that we do centres around our three core pillars of technology, people and planet. We aim to make digital products and services that make people more productive and happy, whether that's in their personal lives or whether as employees, their professional lives.
So all of us here on the panel, and probably those who are in the audience, have probably heard about the concept of the 4 Ps in one way or another. For over 60 years, the concept of price, place, product, and promotion has helped marketeers. To be future fit, can organisations rely on only the traditional toolkit, or is it time to implement a new foundation that can serve as a guiding principle, addressing the importance of planet, purpose, people, and profit? So I'm really keen to hear from all of you if you believe that the 4 Ps have changed, and if so, do they replace the 4 Ps that I've just mentioned, or do they complement them? Amy, perhaps you'd like to take this one first.
Okay, so I'm going to dig in on a couple of the Ps and just explore how they've changed. As the entire world has changed in the last 12 months, there are some pretty fundamental impacts that has had on those precious 4 Ps. The first one I would like to explore a little bit is place. Place has changed beyond recognition, right? We are all stuck in our houses. We've all been locked down for 12 months or more. That's a place that none of us wanted to be for this long, but here we are. And so it's drastically changed how we interact with brands. There is no browsing the supermarket. There is no picking up a packet and exploring and touching and feeling the packaging. There's no precedence placed on aisle placement or point of sale. So many of the elements that brands use to connect with consumers don't exist in an online space. And this online shopping boom has been seen across the industry, right? Grocery shopping has doubled in the UK since 2019. Amazon turnover grew 37% last quarter. So across the board, we need to think of new ways to connect with consumers in this online place. And really we've got a matter of seconds within which to do that. It's that scroll, it's the moment that they tap and click and put us in their shopping cart. And so in this context, the emotional connection that we have with consumers becomes increasingly important. And the emotional connection we have with consumers at its very core is about connecting with their core values, connecting with the things that matter most to them at a societal, environmental, political and social level. What are these brands standing for and how do they align with what I stand for? So I think place has been radically changed, and I think these new P's of purpose and planet, they can really sort of fill some of the gaps that have been created. Another P that I see massive disruption in is price. Our social values massively change how we perceive price, and people are willing to pay a premium for brands that have eco or social values at their core. We see it across industries, right? We see it in Body Shop and Lush in the beauty sector. We see it in Ecover and Method in FMCG. We see it in Patagonia in retail. Goodly actually worked with Bank of the West, who were using their sustainability criteria as a real point of differentiation. They're a bank that have divested from fossil fuels, and they have a 1% for the planet checking account, which enables consumers to give 1% of their checking balance to the planet. And we worked with them to facilitate a donation to 1% through the planet. And it was fantastic to see consideration, brand trust, and loyalty increase through that campaign. And so these metrics of purchase and consideration, they are massively changed by these new Ps in fundamental ways.
Amy, I think really interestingly has picked up on place and price. I wanted to pick up a little bit on promotion from the one set of the equation and profit on the other. So what we can see is definitely that promotion has become much more tied to what companies are doing to better the world than a very simple statement of the product benefits. And whereas 10 years ago, the consumer expectation was that, particularly amongst younger audiences, that they were demanding a greater focus on the promotion around purpose. There was no evidence really that brands really got it and saw the profit benefit from delivering against it. And I think that's changed quite dramatically in the last few years. And with Unilever, for example, leading the way and their sustainable living plan, what they've seen is that margin is improving across the business overall, and that those brands who have really invested significantly in being the exemplars for sustainable living brands, those brands in that portfolio are growing faster than the brands not in that portfolio. And not just that, but some of the brands are really demonstrably improving and saving lives. You take an example like Lifebuoy, for example. Lifebuoy has a very, very simple purpose. It is about helping parents to ensure their children fall less sick less often. And they've been banging on with that purpose actually since 1894. In India, for example, they have been making demonstrable impact, or had demonstrable impact on through work on hygiene in reducing incidents, for example, of diarrhea. Most recently, fast forward to the UK and COVID, they've relaunched the Lifebuoy brand in the UK with a real focus on actually educating children on hand washing regimes and benefits. No great surprise there that you have a brand that's the number one brand around the world and really making a significant contribution to the performance of Unilever overall.
Everybody knows you've got to have a good product and you've got to be promoting it in the right place, and the price has to be right. But people and organizations, or forward-thinking organizations, are also thinking about people and planet. Now, we've known about companies and organizations treating employees and their workers well, and people or organizations who don't do that can lose business. And the same is going to be happening, I feel, and we feel, with planet. If organizations are not treating the planet well, then customers may also be choosing with their feet. So it's about choice now. There is a lot of choice out there for consumers to choose between one brand or another. And when all things are equal, if there is an organisation who's treating people better and the planet better, then people may be choosing those organisations. So yes, I think it's changing, but I think there's a lot of organisations who still aren't thinking that way.
And for those organisations that perhaps aren't feeling that way at the moment, as from everything that we've just said, why now? Why should they act fast now?
Just read the headlines, really. We're in the worst economic slump for 300 years, and we've got the climate crisis around the corner. There is an absolute imperative, a need to act now. But there's not just a need, there's a massive opportunity too for businesses and brands to act now and to really help to build back better. And I mean, that's a phrase that was actually coined, I think, after the 2007 crash. But I think what we're seeing now is a much greater depth to what we mean by build back better. And that means build back fairer, build back stronger, build back greener, really giving, as I say, a great need, an imperative and an opportunity for brands to act now. Of course, the flip side to that is that the consumers are continually demanding that brands step up to that plate. We are a recent survey by Xeon Group in the US amongst 8,000 global consumers and 75 companies and brands revealed that consumers are 4 to 6 times more likely to buy from, to trust, to champion, to defend companies with incredibly strong brand purpose. I mean, expectations have soared of corporations, and they have to step up to the plate. They have to play a leadership role, not just through the pandemic, but to secure economic stability and to tackle some of the great divides that we have going forwards.
Well, as Jane says, we need to do it now. And I think there's been this really fantastic increase in the sense of social responsibility over the last 12, 18 months, both at an individual level and at a corporation level. And Jane has already touched on both, but I just wanted to reflect a little bit on the drivers behind those changes. From an individual level, well, in the UK, 1 in 5 adults volunteered during the pandemic. I mean, that's sort of war level efforts of collective good, this sense of responsibility, of community, of humanity. Like those things were so easily forgotten in the past, but have become such a crucial part of what we've all been through. And I also think that this time of COVID is scary. It's really shook our false sense of security. It's made our differences feel smaller. It's made us feel more united. And this is, I think Bill Gates captures this perfectly when he says that COVID is, in quotes, really easy in compared with the climate crisis. Like, this was a trial run. This was our practice go. And everybody is getting this sense that we need to buckle down. We need to focus on the climate crisis as an issue that is 10 times more severe potentially than what we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months. So that has really flowed into the corporate world as well. Over $7 billion was donated from corporations to support COVID over the last year, and that is 2/3 of all philanthropic donations to COVID. So 2/3 of all the funding to support this pandemic have come from businesses. That's complemented by alcohol brands using their supply chains to create hand sanitizer, and fashion brands creating PPE. Like, the role of corporations in society has had a light shone on it in a way that it hasn't before, and the gaps that corporations fill. This has increased consumer expectation for brands to take action, for brands to contribute. And so this is a trend that is incredibly positive, incredibly exciting, and I think it clearly illustrates why now.
So, climate change is here. Sir David Attenborough says that, we've got 10 years to avert a climate crisis. This is the decade of action. We are seeing, record temperatures in the Antarctic. We're seeing news of flooding, wildfires in Australia. This is here. It is happening, and we need to be doing everything as individuals and as organisations to tackle this. We can do that on many, many different levels. And that's what, we are firm advocates of, is helping organizations to do what they can from a digital perspective. So when you are transforming digitally, you can be making a positive impact to the environment, but we also need to be thinking about how our digital footprint is as environmentally friendly as possible. So what would we do? So, things like leadership, having a leadership that visibly and vocally supports sustainable design and development is really, really important. We need to be starting at a team level and then making an impact of whatever you have got responsibility for. We need to be educating teams so that they understand the impact of their different design and development choices and the impact that has. And we need to be measuring and analysing so that we know what good looks like and we're able to see that we're actually making improvements.
So we've talked about consumers. Is there anything else that you think brands need to be aware of when we talk about the why now and why act fast?
Well, I think, as employees, people also want to be working for an organisation which is making a difference that's positively impacting society. And we've certainly noticed that employees are interested in working at Digital Detox when we are focusing on creating sustainable digital products and services. They want to be working in a place where the culture supports good work and doing the right thing. And so brands also need to be thinking about that. One aspect is consumers and consumers voting, but also employees are voting with their feet. They will potentially move towards organisations who are thinking responsibly, who are making a change to society. It's not just about how much, a salary. It's actually about the impact that they can have in their workplace.
I couldn't agree more, Charlotte. I mean, people often say working at 23 Red, you could cut a 23 Redder like a stick of rock. They are all totally motivated by the impact of the work that they do rather than the creative product. That's not to say the creative product is unimportant. Of course, it's critical to actually helping us to achieve that behaviour change. But the sole motivation for the people working with us is the impact of the work. And we see that in terms of our very, very low levels of staff turnover and our ability to recruit and retain staff.
So we're saying that the 4 Ps that I mentioned at the start, they're not redundant. They're still here. However, the 4 Ps need to evolve in order to sort of address consumer behaviour now. We've addressed the why. Brands need to act fast. They need to act now. It's the decade of action. So for anyone who's in the audience, who's wondering where to start, what advice would we give them? What should they start doing tomorrow? Charlotte?
I think the key thing would be to start now and to start talking within your organisation about what impact you can have and what difference you can achieve. Customers are looking at and choosing brands according to how responsible they are for people and for the planet. Look at Decathlon. They are looking at their supply chain, and they are putting ratings onto their clothing and product of their own brand products, showing the energy rating and intensity of their supply chain for a product. That is giving customers the choice to buy that product or another one, and that transparency is really, really important. We have energy ratings on appliances or when buying a house, and customers are choosing according to those principles.
So I think I've got two tips, really. One of which is get going, you cannot afford to wait. And the other of which is paying lip service isn't enough. What you do needs to be grounded in substance. And just looking at the first of those points, I know that some brands have some anxiety about declaring a point of view, about aligning with a cause because of the risks. And there have been some very high profile instances of that. But Keith Weeds, the president of the Advertising Association, actually was incredibly eloquent on this point. And he says that brands really need to be encouraged to look outside of their business and to ask themselves whether look at the trends and to ask themselves whether the trends are enduring and whether they're going to get bigger. And if yes, they cannot afford not to start on their journey. To the second point, purpose doesn't need to be earth-shattering. What it does need to do or be is to be very clearly aligned to the brand's DNA. And a couple examples of that that we've been working on recently, for example, with Disney on the childhood obesity agenda. Disney has a very well-honed long-term healthy living strategy and clearly holds a very dear place in the hearts of families globally. A brand that can bring real inspiration to a topic that can be potentially quite dry and quite difficult, actually, for parents to get kids to get engaged with the behaviours that will actually ultimately result in tackling behaviour. So a perfect coming together using the entertainment values of Disney and the credibility of Public Health England, and really importantly, a tangible offer to help people to get on that journey, changing behaviours, encouraging children just to do 10 minutes more physical activity. A programme now in its 8th year, which has had a demonstrable impact on children's physical activity levels in England. So I guess, those are my 2 top tips, really. Don't wait and get on that journey and make sure that you deliver with real substance. So align to the brand's DNA and offer real tangible benefit to your customers.
I want to take it back to the fundamental 4 Ps, right? Just where we started, and think about what the role of a brand is. Why build a brand? And really there's 2 elements. Firstly, it's about trust, right? It's a badge of honor. It's a statement of intent. But secondly, it's about self-expression. The brands we wear, the labels we wear, the businesses we buy into, they are an expression of our own values. They are what we want to portray to the world. That's the role that brands play in consumers' lives ultimately. And so when thinking about purpose and when thinking about these new 4 Ps, I would encourage brands and businesses to think about how you can be a facilitator for consumers to act on their social values. There are some lovely examples of this. So Waitrose is an online grocery retailer, and we've talked already about the massive boom in online retail, but they've actually created a space within their online store which only features B Corps and ethical businesses. So they are enabling consumers to select and make their purchase decisions, as Charlotte already alluded to. But, Waitrose are facilitating that decision making. They are making it easy for consumers to do good. And that consumer, they come away from that experience feeling positive about Waitrose as an effect. And that actually brings me on to the second example, which is B Corporations. B Corporations is a fair trade stamp of business that helps consumers identify the businesses who are most committed to prioritising purpose, people, and planet. It's baked into their legal articles of association that they must equally weight profit with some of those social values. And that is something that really helps consumers when they're trying to make those ethical decisions. It's also something that we really focused on when we were building Goodloop, is this idea of democratizing purpose and involving the consumer in that journey. So when you see a Goodloop advert out in the wild, the brand will fund a donation if you engage with their advertising, but you, the consumer, you get to choose which charity that brand funds. You get the final say on where that money goes. What are the causes that are most important to you? And that moment of collaboration between a brand and a person, that is purpose that is most powerful.
It's very clear to me that this is a big conversation and we could talk for a lot longer on it. But in order to help wrap up or to summarise, in one sentence, what would you say to people in the audience that they need to start doing?
For me, it's get going now. You really can't afford to wait, and paying lip service isn't enough. What you do needs to be absolutely grounded in brand substance.
For me, it would be start acting, but talk to people, educate people within the organisation so that they are aware of what they can do, the impact that they can have, and start to measure and analyse so that you can actually see that you're making a difference.
And I would say that purpose without impact is just hot air. So think about what charities or third sector organizations you can partner with that will bring authenticity and action to your purpose.
Thank you all. I would like to just say a big thank you for joining me today on this conversation. It's something that I really, really care about, and I'm delighted that we can sort of share our insights with others. We hope that you've all taken away some valuable insights today. For me, it's no question that technology has surely changed the marketplace since the birth of the original 4Ps concept over 60 years ago. But when it comes to customer-business relationships, the main principles haven't exactly changed all that much. Customers want to feel valued by businesses, and in turn will support businesses who provide value to their lives with their products or their services. To borrow from the panel today, brands need to step up to the plate and act fast. This is the decade of action.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for dialing into this fireside chat as part of the virtual South by Southwest tour. I'm very sad not to be in Austin, but equally it's been offset by the ability to bring together people from the States and the UK, some very talented individuals here today. And I hope the conversation we're about to have is something you find stimulating. So the rise of the creator economy and the abdication of brand control. So I think we can all agree over the last 12 months that the pandemic has shattered many economies, but seen the rise of others. And I'm sure we would all concur that social media is a medium to be reckoned with. I'm Zaid Al-Zaidi. I'm the Group CEO of the Beyond Collective. I was trained in classical marketing at Unilever and worked on many, many iconic brands over the last few years. But I'm a big believer that everything a brand does counts, that everything you do is brand. And we know the rules have changed, and we know that brands' expectations for how they should behave and garner the interest they once had is going to change. The rules have changed, and I've got three companions here who are each at the forefront of this new economy, and I'd like them to introduce themselves one by one. So Jide, do you want to say hi and tell us who you are?
So my name is Jide. I'm CEO at the Yoke Network, and we essentially have a TikTok creator network of over 2,000 creators that is managed through our Creator Marketplace app. And we're also the company behind the UK's largest content creator house, The Wave House.
Great, thank you very much. And George?
Yeah, I'm George. I'm the CEO of Be Hooked Digital. We're a social media consultancy for entertainment and music brands and talent. So yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the intro, Saeed.
Good. And Ollie, last of all.
Hey, I'm Oliver, Managing Director of Social Chain. We're a social first marketing agency. We do pretty much everything and anything in social media, from insight, strategy, creative, through to all the execution and distributional aspects.
Great. So thanks, guys. I think the first thing to say is we've all been through a lot over the last 10 to 12 months, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your business, how it's responded to the pandemic, what the highs and lows have been, and we'll reverse this one. So I'm going to start with Oliver again. So Oliver, how's it been?
How's it been? Personally, professionally, different, right? I think the same can be said for everyone. I think if I go back 1 year, when this first happened, I'm an eternal optimist. So I had a very optimistic view of what the world would turn out like. It ended up being very different. I was wrong on many fronts, but being an optimist, I kind of look on the things that we had to do. We had to transform our business. We produce thousands of pieces of content. And when the world stopped, we weren't able to travel. We weren't able to get together. We had to rethink that in entirety, which involved, us and our partners working with more creators, working with more influencers. And I think one of the more interesting aspects of that whole saga was that we started to see brands think differently about creative, remove some of the ego and the archaic barriers that exist around, only doing things a certain way, falling within very restricted brand guidelines, despite, the internet saying something different. And I think it was a good thing. We started to become more creative. We changed our processes, and business is good.
And how did the brand owners feel about having to let go even more during this period of time?
The funny thing is, when you're forced to do something new, when you're forced to change, you're a little more open-minded, right? I think we've all been forced to change, whether it's we think about internals, externals. So I think when it comes to brands, I think the marketing industry, whether you're in a conservative brand that is very risk adverse for obvious reasons, I think when evidence presents itself and you do things that are effective and work, you can slowly shift perceptions, slowly shift how you do things. And that's what we started to see. I think there was some hesitation at first. There was some salesmanship on our behalf, but brands work with us because they put trust in our thinking and our understanding of the internet.
Great. Okay, great. And George, what about you? How's it been?
It was crazy, really. Just like Ollie said, different to business, different to personal. But I think when we were heading into this as a company, we didn't know what would happen. Obviously, being an online digital company, we knew that stuff was going to move more heavily into that space, but we didn't know quite what would happen. We work in the live music industry as well, so we had some difficulty with our clients in that space. But pretty much overnight, things just went crazy with new ideas and innovation. We started working with a lot of clients that wanted to facilitate live streams, which was an amazing new part of our business. It's been pretty amazing to see all the new, fresh ideas that with brands working with talent as well. I think that one of our big things this year was JW Anderson, which is a fashion brand in Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. And we did some fantastic work there with a Harry Styles cardigan and jumping on trends with TikTok, which was great. But also on the flip end of that, working with Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber and connecting with his audience, which is largely an older audience, and working on with platforms like Facebook, which have become obviously still a massive key consideration for us as a business in terms of advertising, but with our younger talent, and we've kind of focused more on Instagram and TikTok. But again, Facebook was another place to push Andrew's messaging, and we won an award for that at the Drum. So yeah, it's been a very exciting year in terms of a fresh approach and mixing it up a bit more with the team.
Great. And interestingly, working on a fashion brand with a background of, being really protective and pristine about its haute couture kind of positioning, and then letting go, with the Harry Styles cardigan thing you talked about is mental. And that's bang on the money in terms of the title of today's chat. You'd never expect that level of brand to let go that much. It's amazing. And Jide, do you want to talk to me a little bit about your business, which obviously is flourishing, and working with TikTok that we've seen rise significantly, obviously.
So the past 12 months has been pretty phenomenal, just from a business perspective, just because we've been in the TikTok space for nearly 2.5 years now, and we kind of saw for the first time really advertisers really taking TikTok seriously and actually putting real budget behind it, behind the platform. And within our creator network, we've grown. We worked with over 2,000 creators at scale last year, and the expansion of content on the TikTok platform itself has been phenomenal in terms of there's so many different talks. That's what you kind of call it. So there's different types of creators that are jumping on. It's a lot more mainstream, and whereas 12 months ago you're essentially begging some of the biggest creators in the world to come onto the platform, and now it's just natural for them. And if they're not on it, then they're kind of late. So we saw huge expansion in our business in terms of our clients and the types of work that we're doing. And also the rise of short form content as well has been huge just across social media. As you can see with Snap and the Spotlight on TikTok as well, YouTube with their shorts and reels on Instagram. So it's all kind of skewed in our favor. And like finally that we launched like the largest content creator house in the UK, and those astronomical results with that in terms of like we had over like 300 million views on our
Is that with the Wave House? Yeah,
with the Wave House. So over the first like 21 days, we went super viral, and like we're coming back with more as well with that towards the end of Q1 as well. So it's crazy.
Great. And you coined the phrase "the rise of the creator economy," and as someone who is into brand building, I kind of understand that, you know, building a big creator economy means great business for everyone. But why back to the question here is like, aren't you just asking brands to jump on the coattails of other people, and how are they going to get their bang for buck, and how's it good for their brand business, not just for your business?
Well, that's a really good question. I think like just the question itself in terms of what is the creator economy. So the creator economy is like essentially right now we're seeing a shift of power from the platforms and from like traditional media businesses and entities towards the actual creators themselves. And there's like the rise of the essentially you call it a creator media business. Just like, for example, Mr. Beast, he's got the reach and scale of like larger than like the BBC, larger than some of these massive organizations. It's just one person. Or Joe Rogan, he's essentially $1 billion podcast. Like in terms of the amount of reach that he gets, he's a business, and so it's like a personal media business. So I think that for brands, what we're seeing is now that creators actually working with brands, or the ones at the top especially, they have the opportunity to work with whoever they want, or even build their own brands and build their own businesses. So with the rise of the creator economy and how it's going to affect brands is that I think that brands, for them going to work with the top creators, they need to do their due diligence and look more longer term in terms of the relationships, and less of just short activations, but longer term partnerships, and kind of not just ride on the coattails, but actually take the creators that they're working with more seriously, so that they can build long-term sustainable organic content together.
That's interesting. So it's, George, you're like working with like famous entertainment properties and artists whose cachet and influence arguably is greater, you know, something that many brands would kind of envy. So how does it become a joined up relationship, really? Are brands not just almost kind of on their knees begging to get attention? How does it become something where the brand really, really benefits?
Well, for us at BeHooked, we kind of call it hooking up, which is the process of us looking at the brands that we work with, all the brands we're connected to, and also other agencies that we speak to as well, that work with brands. So for us, it's like hooking it up, and I think the most important thing when we hook things up is that people actually have stuff in common. And that there's going to be a relationship, not unlike just people getting together just for dating and stuff. So for us, it's a constant case of like analysing the brands that we're working with and what their missions are, and does that then align with the talent that we're looking at. And sometimes it just comes together. I think I mentioned when we were kind of talking before that we're working with a very famous footballer. He has a specific way of doing things and content that he likes to create, and that just happens to match perfectly with the brand goals of the brand that we're working with, and that's success in a nutshell. So it's very important to kind of get those two working in parallel together.
I think when we last spoke, we talked about the fact that we're all predicting that the mandate for brands to get stuck into social is going to be like greater and greater over the next few months. And then we started talking about how do you get brands ready for social, and should all brands go social? And there are so many pitfalls, right? From getting it wrong when it comes to Black Lives Matter. We witnessed L'Oreal getting it very, very wrong. If you think about all the conversations around platforms and their ability to support freedom of speech and the role they've played in the changing landscape in democracy, there are so many kind of potential bear traps and pitfalls for brands. So, Oliver, I'm going to ask you, how do you get your brands ready for this world in which they've got to operate in, but arguably it's more risky for them than it's ever been? How do you guide them through that?
That's if you're a big multi-billion-dollar brand, that's a multi-billion-dollar question. I think it links back to what we're talking about generally. The creator economy. The way I look at the creator economy is it's kind of this democratization of media. You genuinely can't fathom how many choices you have as a brand. On YouTube alone, there are over 20,000 people with 1 million subscribers at their fingertips, often young people in their bedrooms creating. And that's like a small team, one person. There are over 250,000 people have over 100,000 people at their fingertips. Move on to Instagram, onto TikTok, and you can't extrapolate. So I think in that abundance of choice presents all the opportunity in the world for brands, but it brings so many threats and challenges because it's complex. We often talk about social media being one thing. Social media is many things. Each platform, the average person's active on 6.5 social networks. Every platform has its own cultures, its subcultures, its own algorithmic factors. And if you're a social marketeer, you're expected to know those things, which is largely impossible because they change daily. Like a fact I tell you today may be different tomorrow. So I think the key for brands is you have to take social media seriously, but it's more about looking intrinsically at the business themselves and making sure you're equipped to be effective in social media. There are a couple of principles that aren't tactics or specific, but they apply to everyone. To be good at social media, you need to understand culture. You need to understand what's happening in the world. If to be good at social media, you have to be fast, you have to be agile. Being fast and agile is more than just a process, it's being brave. Like, to be fast and create something quickly, you need to know yourself, being very self-aware. And I think brands that are self-aware, knowing when they should speak and when they shouldn't, it's effectively a superpower on the internet today. So I think if you can get those principles and you can look inwards at your culture of your company and the partners that you work with and have the right types of philosophical values, I think you can be tremendously effective. And we've seen time and time again, brand go from, not existing 5 years ago to being a world leading brand today. So the opportunity is there, but it's not easy.
For those brand owners out there listening in, I think that brands should feel very encouraged, because often the answer is just defining that narrative, that consistent role within culture. And that's about understanding what your brand's for, against, I think with that kind of clarity and self-awareness, I think it will guide you through, we're going to participate in this subculture because that's relevant to us and we can add value. We're going to ignore that subculture because we've got no place at all. Because if you look at the history of advertising and how great brands have been historically built, often they've captured the imagination by stepping really far away from their category, right? If you think about Apple and the way it launched itself against the beige computing world in the 1990s, it stood for something epic and on a big human campaign. And arguably in social, I think brands are they can achieve way more than they used to, which is proximity and understanding and empathy and engagement, but they might not be able to step away from their category as much, which I think is interesting. And so, we've been working with Subway a lot this year, and our dilemma has been, how do you take them from a brand that's all about big brand awareness, advertising, stores open, to brands that need to operate on a more hyper-local level, using social activation to be more meaningful on a smaller level. So, working out that some people are chili hotheads, so that's a really relevant way to serve up a sub to them. And I think it's really exciting for me, because I think it means that brands need to understand themselves better than ever before. And I think that's the way to manage those pitfalls for me, is that narrative, that authenticity, knowing when you can play a role, when you can't. Do we want to attempt to predict maybe you can tell us, what do you think the emerging trends are, and what are you expecting to be busy with over the next 12 months, maybe? Jide, do you want to, I know you have you have a view on what's going to happen. Do you want to start?
Yeah. So in terms of our business, we're creator first in terms of we help the creator side, but we also integrate brands help brands to integrate and best work with creators. Some of the stuff that we're kind of seeing is that there's a diversification of creator revenue streams. Be it that them going direct to their audience in terms of Patreon or OnlyFans, them opening their own Shopify stores, So that directness is obviously giving the creators more power. But what I'm also seeing is that trends from the past or businesses that have done it successfully, such as Gymshark and PLT, what they've done is they've made creators be their forefront, be their first point of marketing. So, and with that, it actually makes the top creators want to go out and work with these brands even at a cut price or even at a lower cost, but they kind of have that in that Gen Z, it's like call that clout. So what I'm seeing is over the next 12 months is that the brands that are investing in the creators and building their own creator networks, they'll be able to attract like the higher value creators, and it's going to be a lot more organic in terms of the type of content that they're making. And like the creators themselves are going to be able to build their own businesses through their own audiences, but there's going to be a lot more organic relationships. The relationships that are going to be successful are the organic ones, are the ones where it's a longer term strategy and not just the small branded activations, because they have less of an impact, but over the long term, the real winners are the ones that really invest in this new economy.
How can you even begin to be long term in a kind of economy that's notoriously about waves of interest that come and go?
No, that's a very, very good question. And it's something that Oliver kind of touched on in his response to the previous question, and it's the way that the brand sets up internally. Because I definitely think that you need to structure your team so that you can, one, kind of cover all bases from like the top brand level down to what's actually going on in these subcultures, what's actually going on in these platforms. So I couldn't put it all in an answer now, but what I would say is that there needs to be a lot more agility within teams and actually kind of know who you want to message, and finding that subculture, finding that culture online and that audience on be it Reddit, be it on TikTok, be it on YouTube, finding that platform that works best for your product and your brand, and then kind of building out or scaling from there. That's what I would say.
Yeah, so a really strong strategy. And then George, tell me, what are you saying? What are you hoping for as an entrepreneur?
Well, I mean, yeah, the big, we're quite lucky because we obviously work with talent, and we also work with big brands like Activision and, as I mentioned, Louis Vuitton, Hennessy. And I think that what we're seeing is the biggest brands that we work with that are usually like cruise ships to move in one direction. And we're touching on this as we're talking about the flexibility of the brands, but their approach is becoming far more like talent and far more like creators. So how do we produce content at scale, like, short form content, as Hide mentions, but also, just how we put that together. And whereas we used to face those challenges mostly with talent in having, 20 posts going out a week and all different types of narratives happening, that's happening more with brands. And, we're taking the very similar approach to like pre-planning lots of content ahead of time, and then also reactive moments throughout. For some of our biggest brands, and it's a very exciting space to be in. I mean, for us as a business, it means a lot more work with our partners and our clients, and that's fantastic.
Great, brilliant. And then Oliver,
crystal ball time. I think we're going to see a little more of a worlds colliding. I couldn't agree more with sort of Jide and George around the creator economy continuing to establish. I think, 2 years ago, brands were testing working with influencers. Now they're establishing teams internally. 4 years ago, we would book thousands of influencers on behalf of the brands that we work with. Today, they're building in-house structures, and they're leaning on partners externally more and more for either working directly with platforms or talent management companies, and leaning on agencies so that influencer marketing or the creators that they work with don't sit in silo. They're part of a wider sort of system in place. And I think we're going to see, the creator economy continue to grow. But I think it's going to merge with this community economy. And I think for the longest time, brands have chased scale on the internet. You could go viral, you can get millions of impressions, became really normal. If you just say that out loud, it just feels very normal. But I think what brands will start to recognize is, and you mentioned it earlier, was that kind of the depth of storytelling is going to be so important. And you achieve scale by going deeper with your storytelling, the types of things you create, and also focusing on your community. we're seeing like the Wall Street bets, the Reddit take on the establishment, and we're seeing the fringes of the internet. These really rich, deep communities have massive impact in the world, and I think brands will recognize that. They will start to invest, they'll start to care. And the first step in acting is kind of caring about something. And I think the rest of the world will start to realize that a meme isn't this trivial thing. It can be pretty powerful in the right hands. So yeah, a lot more respect on deep storytelling. I think we're going to see more people care about their community and start to build them. Jide mentioned Mr. Beast, huge community, huge influence. Joe Rogan has, disciples of people that adore him across the world. You have FaZe Clan that have merged culture, selling product, media, coming together. So there's the emergence of new age marketing, new age brands. And I think traditional brands that are established will recognize and start to adapt and change accordingly.
Great. I definitely try and learn from my 13-year-old son, who was coaching me before this session, by the way. All right, guys, I think we're up for time. It's been a great session, and I hope the viewers have got something out of it. Good luck, and hopefully see you soon.
Well, it's lovely to be here, but it's also very different to be here because we're in little squares and not in Texas this year, which I know is a big shame to us, but also it's an opportunity for us to connect and meet new people in different ways. This session is about content and immersion, and I'm delighted to be amongst some brilliant minds that have been working in this industry for over 20 years. And I think that we're going to have a free-flowing conversation today. I'm looking forward to Guy, John and Ryan to share their expertise with us and to share their journeys with how they've seen that change over the years. And I think the provocation that we want to start with is we have been working in these worlds for quite some time now, some of us decades, but we've seen a huge accelerated disruption in our worlds and other people's worlds. And just to sort of reflect on what we've seen over the past year and how we think that impacts us coming out. And I'd like to hand over to Ryan to share some thoughts with us.
Thanks, Sarah. I think, let's just get this out there straight away and mention the P word being the pandemic. That has been a huge accelerator for the way that consumers are behaving, businesses are behaving, and it's really starting to change the way that people want to consume content. So, at Territory, we've worked very heavily in the entertainment space for many years and seen kind of very high-end, luxurious kind of experiences on the big screen. But we're now seeing the need for brands to start to bring those immersive experiences back into the way that they engage with their consumers and try and do something differently, try and cut through. Because the expectation of being able to sit on a video call or a Teams call or whatever it may be and experience something is actually now just hygiene. It's just the norm. It's just the normal day to day. So, brands and businesses, need to work so much harder now to try and grab people's attention and also to keep them engaged on an ongoing basis. So the whole landscape's changed now.
And John, tell us a little bit more about what you've seen in your part of the world.
Yeah, well, our part of the world is kind of global. So we've got studios in London, Toronto, Cape Town, and Shanghai. And I think from a client's perspective, I think they've really engaged with that more than ever. Like they know that it's a global 24-hour machine, but now that everybody's sort of stuck in the pandemic at the moment, I think they really appreciate the fact that we're constantly in touch, that we're constantly working, and they don't worry about certain people not being in the studio. Like having creative directors in Cape Town and some in Toronto just feels acceptable, whereas before we had to explain it with a few stories to sort of, explain how we work and why we work that way. But I think, one of the results that people are going to find, that we're going to find with human behavior, I hope, is more sort of geolocation experiences. I hope that after this, people will want to go out and experience stories like spatially, and experiences as well. And I guess I'm sure, in fact, with AR and the way it's moving forward, we're going to see more and more of that. So that's something that we're, particularly interested in, as well as people just, enjoying a story or an experience in space rather than just at home. So I think we might see a big trend towards experiential storytelling that we're all involved in on this call, which should be great.
And Guy, you've seen it on the front line, haven't you? You've been working in this world and that convergence.
Yeah, I think the dam's burst, right? It's for the last sort of couple of decades, we've seen people experimenting in digital, looking at digital, playing with it. I sometimes feel like I'm the mad monk on the top of the hill saying, hey, this new thing's about to arrive. And everyone's going, yes, Guy, that's very nice. But I think what's happened over the last year is that dam's burst. The pressure was rising that this was a mature industry now. We've gone from digital being 5% of someone's budget, or 5% of the audience, or 5% of this, that, and the other, really now into way past that tipping point. And I think what it's pushing is now a single question, which is, what does this mean? What actually now does this mean? And we're having to interrogate that question from quite a fundamental level, and I think from a content perspective, that means going back to the core of what a story is. You can't just put your video out on YouTube anymore of whatever it was and hope that that's going to be the answer. You have to go back and rethink the medium slightly and think, how do we recraft messages, whether it's a brand message, or whether it's a Shakespeare play, or whether it's a game, or whether it's a TV series. You've got to go back and think about what that core story is, and then build it up in that new medium. So I think we're in for a fascinating time. A completely brilliantly inventive and imaginative and experimental time as we go through this. It'll be challenging for a lot of people because change always is, but I'm excited by it, and I think we do have those experiments that have happened over the last 20 years. We've got those to fall back on. We can go back and see, hey, look, Netflix Bandersnatch. It's a bit like Choose Your Own Adventure in the 1980s. We'll get a lot of that coming up, but it's exciting.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because, Guy, what you're saying there about the storytelling and the narrative, and John, what you're saying about, bringing these kind of different layers of an experience together, be they virtual or kind of multidimensional. I think that's where brands and businesses need to work harder, because the single narrative of a storyline is not going to be strong enough now. And actually, we need to think about what the different levels of the customer experience are going to be. So where, a business has had a physical experience, like a theater or a museum or whatever it may be, there's a predetermined, service design or customer experience around that. And it had its own story. But now, in the other end of the spectrum, you've got virtual. But I think what we're going to be seeing is the way that those things blend much more effectively. And that's going to completely change the need for the story narrative. But it's also going to change and enhance the narrative because it's going to be multidimensional. Like you said, with the Netflix Bandersnatch, users are going to be able to channel swap or kind of experience swap in between listening to one individual story in its own right. And, the way that, technology is converging is going to make that a lot easier for the likes of ourselves, I'm sure.
And bear in mind, by the way, Ryan, you're right. Bear in mind that the physical world and the virtual world are now the same, and we've seen it politically with the US elections, with fake news. That's the bad side. But there is no distinction between the two, and that's what we need to build off.
Yeah, I think, you know what, like those points are just so relevant for where we are right now, because I think it's interesting to look at how technology is moving so fast, and we're about to see all these different types of AR glasses coming out, all these different light field experiments. You know, these things are getting so small. Combine that with 5G and a few other buzzwords, and instantly what we have is some amazing, lovely new technology that we can start working with. And I think when that happens, you know, there's always this move towards just focusing on the tech. But I think everybody on this call, with the amount of experience we've had in storytelling and experience design, you know, we'll be coming at it from the story, which is so interesting. I mean, you know, from a perspective of projection mapping, let's say, something that we've seen and we've all done, you know, countless times in the past. Forget the projectors now, forget the rigging, forget getting, you know, forget getting permission off the council. Let's just have it in AR. Like, this level of geolocation, geonodal tracking in 5G is going to be phenomenal. And that's just like scratching the surface, you know?
You know, from our experience, John, I mean, I completely agree with that. You know, we're seeing that in the way that people are producing movies now as well, you know, through virtual production. You know, technology is changing the game in the way that even the experiences are designed and made. You know, so probably the biggest standout example is the Star Wars Mandalorian, for example. They use virtual production where they've got big screens and they've actually designed these environments that are then sat on the set, and you're actually recording against a digital projection, albeit on a screen. You know, we did the same for the David Fincher movie Mank, and it completely accelerates the opportunity in the way that you produce content, and you actually make it more immersive. Because, you know, for the Mandalorian, it was like, oh, let's move that cactus 3 feet to the left, for example. On Mank, it's like, actually, let's move that building there and change that building from a barbershop to something else. I mean, it gives you like a completely different opportunity. And I think the underpinning theme that we're probably starting to unpick here is world building. And, you know, we've got the opportunity to create these worlds that are super immersive, engaging, and more exciting than they've ever been through that convergence of technology. You know, exactly to your point, John, in terms of the way that you can apply even on the ground. So what we're really talking about in terms of what we've seen in the film and entertainment space is around virtual production. So very much like what you're saying there, John, where, you know, a brilliant example of how that's been applied in the real world is with the likes of The Mandalorian in the Star Wars universe. So they use virtual production where they've actually got screens and they're rendering experiences that then get projected on those screens when they're actually creating the show. We've done similar work for the David Fincher movie Mank, you know, so you can actually make real-time decisions on how that experience should then be portrayed to make it more immersive. You can actually do that live. So, you know, Mandalorian moved that cactus 3 or 4 meters one side. The Mank, you know, changed that barbershop to, you know, something else. And it just creates, you know, such a huge opportunity to really craft the right experience at the right time. And it starts to bring the lag down, the time where you can then start to create this intimacy with the content, you know, making it, you know, almost real time, you know. And I think that's a really exciting development and opportunity.
There are a couple of things there, actually. So if you think about a story, like, say, let's carry on talking about Mandalorian, right? So a story broadly is made up of the story world, which you're just describing, you know, that is now all in virtuals, the narrative, which is what happens in that world, and the characters, which is what happens to it. And I think as we move into the sort of this enormous new world of virtual worlds, of metaverses and so forth, it's great to build the world, but you need to populate it with something. And again, we can go back to learnings from things like Second Life. There was an enormous amount of learning and of lessons from that about how to operate those sorts of worlds, which I think are going to come back again, you know, and become super relevant. Also, the other point to say is, which as you just saying, was the concept of almost of previs. So you're not necessarily doing a storyboard and then making the movie now. You're spinning up a version of a movie where studios and networks can test not only what it looks like, but what a character might feel like. So, I might go into an episode with a new character, talk to that potential member of the audience, and then the studios can see whether or not that character is resonating, whether that mood is good, whether their cheekiness level is right, all of that stuff, and then play it out from there. So I think we are in a very much more fluid media environment that is enabled by Unreal and the new technologies that are on the, or not that it's new, but the new approaches to those technologies that are on the table at the moment, and that goes back to sort of changing that story, changing the way that we think about the production processes.
So true. I think, you talk about real-time rendering in Unreal, and then talk about AI and sort of interactive narratives as well. Look at it, the beauty of these two pieces of storytelling, tools. And then if we take it take it one step to the right or to the left, look at immersive theatre and how that's captivated people, all over the world. And then let's take the immersive theatre outside, let's take it into the city, and people are going to be chatting and following narratives around the city. You can just picture it with, real humans with AI characters in the story as well. And you can see how this is going to unfold. And I think that everybody, certainly in this talk, has all got in some way some kind of theatre background, either actively on projects now or as a main career point. And it's funny, isn't it? You look at sort of all the tools that we're given now, and it all comes back to maybe something as straightforward and as clear as theatrical experiences, except that we have so many more options to deliver them now and so many different canvases to work with.
Isn't it brilliant that the two major careers that are coming back, sort of thing, are theatre and philosophy? The more advanced we move into AI, the more the philosophers are needed, and the more we move into interactive storytelling, the more the theatre industry is needed. I think it's brilliant.
So it's really interesting you talking about theatre makers and philosophers, and particularly artists and philosophers. It feels like it's their time, and we've been very technology led for at least the last 10 years around this. And John, I know you've talked about that, but this convergence now between our artists, philosophers and technology is super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to find originality is and uniqueness coming from every angle. One of the things we find it really difficult to say, what do we do at immersive, like an elevator pitch, because every project's quite different and we pick up different technologies. That's not even the point. The technology is not the point. It's the experience. And there will be so much freedom, and there will be so many different types of canvases and ways that we can work with stories and experiences, that I think we're going to find, unique moment building on unique moment. It's definitely a great time for people with vision and people who've got a passion to tell stories. It really is.
And if you remember, John, also going back, the goal of design so much is to hide the technology. The best user interface is an invisible user interface. And absolutely. And I think you're right, that originality's got to come through. If you go back to, I don't know, when the Gutenberg press first came out, and prior to that, there were 9,000 books in existence. And I think within something like 100 years, there were 9 million books out in the world. It was an incredible sort of movement. So naturally, what people are going to be looking at is like, my God, which book do I choose? Well, I choose the one that I want to read that's most sort of interesting or perhaps original as well. And my God, if that's, we're not even looking at 9 million now. If you think about how many, we've stopped counting how many websites there are in the world. It seems quite archaic to even think about that concept now. But, we're always looking for how to play with this. And that's why, it is exciting. It's like we've got a new set of paintbrushes, a new tool set. And then there's this great question of like, okay, what can we build with it? And that naturally requires discipline, actually, because while the temptation is to throw everything at it, you use every color in the palette. If you use every color in the palette, you get gray. So it doesn't work. What you need to do is have a bit of discipline. Think about, things like story arcs, the way that you construct a story with the peaks and troughs, the way that you craft characters, the way that you craft world. What is the craft that we can bring from all of the creative industries? Learn from that and then bring that sort of respectfully into the new tech.
So, Guy, I think the two interesting things that I'm hearing there are it's purpose. You have to have a purpose, and the experience has to have a purpose. It's got to deliver something specific. I think the thing I'd also add to that is ambition, because there's a lot of, like you say, there's a lot of technology out there, and brands need to have the right level of ambition to make sure that they create the right experience for their end users, for their customers. So if you can bring purpose and ambition together in the right measurements, I think you get something very exciting. I think if you look at the way that the virtual event landscape is evolving, and has obviously had to evolve incredibly quickly, as we're experiencing here, and you take a look at the world's biggest technology show, CES, it was kind of just potentially the world's largest Teams call. And, I think you really miss the opportunity to experience the glitz and the glamour of CES, the smells, the sounds, everything that's going on. It's a very multi-dimensional experience when you're actually there in Las Vegas, experiencing all the wonderful technology that comes through. But, for me personally, like the ambition scale wasn't quite set properly there. And I think also, I don't think they were really kind of dialing into the purpose. I think all it was is just a direct replication of, what is basically hygiene for now. Right now, everyone's used to sitting on a Teams call, Zoom's call, Hangout, whatever it may be. That isn't really creating anything immersive for myself. It's just creating yet another channel of dialogue that I need to consume. And dialogue's not good enough right now. So, if you're looking at the way that virtual events should be moving forward, there was one great virtual event hung off the back of CES, and that was the Bridgestone experience. That was super immersive. It was very kind of content led. It really brought the users in. And, it's Bridgestone. I mean, who would have thought that they would have created something like that? But actually, it was pretty wonderful. Now they obviously looked at, let's have a high level of ambition. Let's create some appropriate use of technology, and let's have a purpose to deliver something that's interesting to help us stand out and talk to our customers properly. And I think, when we start to move into these frictionless environments, we've all talked about this, previously, we really need to start to think about how we can create those same connections with brands and people when we're in those environments.
I think that's a really good note, and I think just to sort of end on that, actually, Guy, I'm going to come to you, and then John and Ryan for a final thought on just riffing off what Ryan's just shared with us around, what was a necessity at a time, and then what do we find through that in terms of connection and togetherness and all the frictionless ways that we can have story and content.
Well, to me, connections, the key about connection is it's a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. And that means that if I put something out there as the user, I'm expecting something back. The implications of that are actually enormous around interactivity, whether it's a story or whether it's a brand. Brands can no longer just put their brand out there like a website and expect not to be interacted. They need to think about their personality, what tone of voice they have, what personality do they have, and similarly, we need to dive more into character design in the way that we build our stories, and that's going to be that's a lot of what we spend our time thinking about is the new models for these. So we have had connection forced on us through virtual ways over the last 18 months, more so than we ever probably have in history. And it is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a thing. And I think there is no sort of going back to a normal. We just need to now take some time to assess what has happened to humanity and how we make those connections meaningful rather than just an excuse for shiny tech to drop into fill a vacuum. We have to plan it.
Yeah, it's some great points there. Honestly, I think that on the most positive note, I think we can see as experienced designers, everyone here probably got at least 20 years experience. All of us working in this environment. What's super interesting is that as we move forward, I think more than ever, we're going to see a spirit of collaboration. We're going to see a real meeting of the minds between DOPs and directors and audio designers, architects and artists and spatial designers. That's how I'm sure that's how we all work already, and that's certainly how Immersive works. But when you see that coming together, because we've got the freedom of the technology, I think this sense of collaboration is going to result in some really unique work, because I think we've all sat in brainstorming meetings, we've sat in creative meetings, and someone says this, and then someone else is thinking that, and then it rebounds to be a completely different idea. And all of that lovely creative process, I think, is going to define the new experiences of the future. So yeah, looking forward to that.
I think what I'll do is, in terms of kind of guiding principles, things that I think from a belief perspective, we're creating these digital products, digital experiences that we need to bring in. I've mentioned ambition, I've mentioned purpose. If I was to add a third one to that, I think I'd say non-linear. And I think the experiences of the future need to be non-linear. We've touched on this extensively through this chat. Modern users and future digital users are not going to want to follow a specific path. Whether it's bringing in the various technologies that John's mentioned, or bringing in AI and avatars to help us have these kind of multi-dimensional, unique, bespoke flows through a digital experience, be it an event or a theatre experience. I think that non-linear nature is the bit that, as humans, we want to come back to, and it excites us. Like a little bit of the unknown, it kind of slightly scares us, slightly excites us, and it's like, what could be? Well, what happened if I would have gone down here? And I guess it's all really just bringing to life in a really immersive and super cool way. Those old kind of sci-fi books, dungeon books, where you'd read the first page and it's like, do you want to go through this door, jump to page 2 or jump to page 54? I guess it's just like a really sophisticated kind of immersive version of that now, which is awesome. But, for me, though, you got to have guiding principles when you're creating something. You got to have values that you want to believe in. And for me, it's, purpose, ambition, and non-linear.
And I think on that note, that's a brilliant way to end this conversation. It's been an absolute delight to listen and share. Guy, John and Ryan, thank you so much for your time. The future is going to be interesting and full of jeopardy for all of us. But I think we've shared today some real highlights of the values and principles around that. Thanks very much.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome to our session on Enter the Metaverse. We have been joined today by 3 or 4 amazing UK companies to talk about how the metaverse is adapting around us and how it's evolving. We have Tracy, Niall, and Daniel. First up, Tracy, tell me about your company and what you guys do.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. I'm Tracy from Polystream. We are a cloud technology company and we're working on command streaming, which, to keep it simple, is a very, very shiny new way to stream games and virtual worlds from the cloud, and we believe is a big infrastructure key to unlocking the metaverse. And today I'm here to mainly talk about our new product, Phantom, as part of that metaverse, because Phantom allows you to have a link, invite your friends and family to jump instantly into virtual worlds without any downloads. So it's quite an exciting time, and I think the metaverse isn't science fiction anymore. I'm really excited to be talking about it today.
Awesome, great to have you here. Daniel, tell me about Happy Finish.
Absolutely. I'm Daniel Cheetham. I head up what we refer to as the interactive division of the business. We've been in the business of creating immersive technology-based content and experiences for predominantly brands over the last 8 to 10 years, working with the likes of Nike, Netflix, Microsoft. and so on. Really interested in how we can leverage our skill sets, create experiences that sort of sit within this new realm of the metaverse that create meaningful interactions for audiences.
Awesome. And Niall, tell me about the mighty Dandelion and Burdock.
Thanks, all. I'm Niall Thompson. I'm the Managing Director of Dandelion and Burdock. And we create digital experiences, interactive installations, and live events for a global set of clients. We've got offices here in London and also in Los Angeles. And we primarily use real-time technology to create spectacular animated content. And what we're currently doing is helping companies transition to delivering virtual events and understanding what that means for their audiences.
Awesome. And I'm Sol Rogers. I'm the founder of Rewind. We're an immersive content specialist based out of London and Los Angeles. And we're really focused on trying to bring the physical and digital world a little bit closer together. You might have seen our work as kind of hybrid events for Madison Beer, launching Jaguar's electric car wall in virtual reality, and the BBC Home project lets anyone go to space. But all of us really have been working for the last 8 to 10 years, creating content, which I think is really the bedrock of what a lot of people beginning to call the metaverse. The metaverse has got a lot of attention recently, and it seems to be a buzzword kicking around. But I think one of the first things to talk about is that, for me personally, and this group agrees, is that the metaverse, we are just at the very beginning of trying to define what it is. It's like a 16th century surgeon trying to describe what the human body is. They know some of the bits and the parts, but really we don't know any of the detail. To get from there to now, or the original founders of the internet in the kind of 60s and 70s wouldn't have a clue that Snapchat would be this big where we are right now, but it is a journey to get to that point. But I guess kind of open question to the group, but what does the metaverse mean? And, why is it so important at this time? Maybe Tracy, do you want to jump off?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because I think you're right. We're seeing that pivot from trend and from what we know as the story of the metaverse being a destination, to actually, all of us here are building it and we're living in it. And for me, the metaverse is becoming that extension of and that blend of where our real and virtual selves live and connect and socialize and have emotional experiences. And I feel this year in particular has accelerated that emotional adoption, the emotional shift that we've had from the technology side, so that our brains are taking us into hang on, how do I emotionally feel around these cultural experiences now? And the label that I think sort of feels most comfortable around that is the metaverse.
Yeah, and I believe that, we were talking the other day that it's the groundwork has been done, and I guess the games industry believe they have already built the metaverse in some ways, from these multiplayer, massive environments where people can come together, and the rest of the world is finally waking up to those kind of technologies. But maybe Daniel, I know that you've been building kind of proof points for brands along the way, but what are we seeing now, which is tangible, that is kind of the first glimpses in, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I have a particular view on what the metaverse is, and for me, I'm not sure it is completely new in many respects. I like to think of the fact that it's sort of an evolution from the internet, from digital connectivity. Where does the line from it being a digital virtual layer on the world or representation of real life, which I think is in some ways a definition of the metaverse, but where does Zoom sit on that? Where does Facebook sit on that spectrum? Where does it sit when I'm bouncing between mobile and desktop, not necessarily just VR? So from a distinction perspective, I think that the foundations are already there. How brands are super keen to try and leverage this space, because when I'm engaged digitally, when I feel like I have agency in a space, I'm really listening, I'm really paying attention. And obviously my eyeballs, my ears are valuable to brands. So it was one of the areas that we get asked a lot, is how do we leverage the metaverse to get our message across to people? And it's really interesting.
Absolutely. I think people everyone's, especially in this time of, global pandemic, we've all had an acceleration towards, using technology to connect people from, disparate locations around the world. And I think that is a forcing function, but I'm sure we all have had it. Everyone seemed to knock on our doors like this time March last year saying, can I have a virtual insert brand, product, event, sport? And we had to remind them that the technology isn't quite there yet. We're very close, and we have some of it, but if you wanted to do a VR version or whatever, there's just not enough headsets in the world yet. No, I mean, the metaverse obviously has so many different things, but what's your point of view and what type of work are you doing at the moment that kind of leads towards it?
I think, Tracy and Daniel really hinted on, a few kind of key elements of what, I would define as the metaverse. And I think it is that, that hyper-connected alternate digital reality. And I think it's kind of born out of the adoption of new technologies and that willingness to try to meet in these alternative spaces, these virtual spaces. And we're seeing it on the very kind of base level, which is, people doing online learning or being forced to do online learning, attending virtual concerts and even just, video chats or conferences like this. And I think where it gets really interesting for us as content producers who primarily work in live events is starting to understand how that will then transition into what we would call kind of a hybrid virtual event. And we're certainly foreseeing that this trend of these physical spaces with virtual spaces will continue going forward. And what's particularly interesting is how kind of luxury brands and live entertainment companies will start to kind of embrace this hyper digital age. And I think gaming is such a huge part of it. And I think what we're seeing is that games are feeling more like events and virtual events are feeling more like games when we're starting to weave in things like interactivity. I think, Tracy, you mentioned something really interesting about, these cultural moments and finding ways to kind of have those moments in a virtual space, I think is going to be really important because it allows people to discuss that world and that experience outside of it, with their friends and family so that it becomes more real. And I think that's what makes it all feel more tangible.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely that. And that has led us to thinking about not just how we are creating experiences for players and how we are bringing people into virtual game worlds. For us, we're interested in the spectator piece. We're interested in bringing spectators into those environments. I think I'd read a stat that 38% of gamers went into non-gaming events last year. So we've got Fortnite concerts and, we've got tournaments in Rocket League. And when you put a spectator in that environment, real time, that doesn't impact core gameplay, but they get to just hang out and connect and socialize. And then you give them presence and agency. And I think, Daniel already said about agency. And I feel that's a really big key to this sort of next trend of where the metaverse is taking us next. We're entering the metaverse. When we give spectators presence and agency, we open up these experiences to all of these people who have become early adopters, and maybe some people have been a bit anxious. Zoom, I'm having to now have calls with my mum on video cameras, and I think we've got over that hurdle this year. And now I'm really excited as to what do we do for these new audiences that are in this space? How do we engage? How do we connect? And how do we go beyond gaming? How do we make these truly connected, emotional, immersive experiences that everybody can share?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've been doing a lot of virtual reality creation over the last few years, which I think is an ultimate end to being able to feel presence within a digital world, a digital environment. And all of our work there is trying to make something which connects with audiences and makes them feel participant in a story. It's all storytelling in different flavors. But most recently, leaning to what Niall was talking about, it's about creating hybrid events and hybrid spaces, things that exist in the real world and the digital. And this is for us, most recently working on the Madison Beer concert for Sony, is a perfectly digital twin of Sony Music Hall. There's a perfect digital twin of her to perform in that virtual space. And so allowing virtual visitors to attend what could be a physical concert that happens side by side. And it solves, obviously it's a forcing function of the pandemic. People can't get together in the real world. How can we get them together virtually? But as we come out of it, I think that bedrock will stay, because there will be those that, that venue can only hold 1,000 people. We can now have 10,000 or 10 million in there, because digital visitors as many as you like. But secondly, there's a whole other thing that we've got to be worried about, which is climate change. And the biggest impact actually to climate change, to climate impact from a gig, is 90% is the people that visit it. All those people that drive to the event. It's not actually the people doing a gig. And Coldplay have said that they won't do any more touring unless it's net zero. But part of that digital world that we're creating at that point, and for the metaverse, is about feeling present, participatory, and having a moment. And Niall, you were talking to me the other day about how you really concentrate on trying to create intimacy as part of those experiences.
Well, I think it's about finding ways to make the metaverse feel human. And I think, one of the fundamental things that will make it feel like that is something you mentioned, Sol, which is like storytelling. Making it feel like what we all naturally want to do anyway. And I think it's about weaving things like interactivity, making the space feel not necessarily real. You have a weird opportunity because it is a virtual space. It can be anything, but I still feel like it needs to feel like somewhere you would want to spend time. That just comes down to the fundamental core of being human. You want to spend time in a space, and it's our job as creators to design that. So that's kind of our thinking around it.
I would love to say, to Niall's point, for me, it is exactly that. That's the thing that really, really excites me, when it's an extension of the real. And now when you talk about intimacy, one of the things that it makes me think about is how we move as ourselves seamlessly across these experiences. So Sol, the Madison Beer concert was just, chef's kiss. It was amazing and it was great, but I had to talk to my friends about it outside of that experience. Many of us were in it together. And then when you think about how you leverage brands on top of it, within that space, I want to be me. I don't want to really adopt an avatar. I don't want to then have to change that avatar in the next experience that I go into. That economy of avatars, I think, is complicated for brands. The moment that I can be myself in these spaces, I think, is where I'm going to begin to feel more of those intimate moments, where I go to a concert and maybe in real life they're a tiny little figure on a stage, or I have to watch the main band on a screen anyway, but I come in the car and I'm hanging out with my friends, and that moment when it becomes that a little bit more real, I think, is going to be connected to how much of myself is in that experience versus, oh, look, I look like a giant snowman with a dog's face, and I've had to buy a gun in the marketplace before I can join into this conversation. I think that's one of the challenges, but the exciting things to explore right now.
And there's so many different ways of, as Daniel was talking earlier, there's so many ways into this connected tissue, which is the metaverse. There are so many different layers, and you often talk about the idea of multimodal. Like, can you talk a bit about how you're trying to make sure that there's lots of ways in to access content and people to kind of connect?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the term interoperability is a really key term in many ways around what we're sort of alluding to as the metaverse. One, and I pick up on a point that Tracy made, which was with regards, we tend to we go all the way to complete virtual environments, but actually the metaverse for me also means a layer on the real world that when I am in real life, I can interact with, that brings me some sort of utility. That utility can be entertainment. It's why Netflix does so well. We all need to be entertained at times, but it could be also from a professional perspective or an educational perspective, or wayfinding even. I think that's part of the metaverse. But I'm interacting with that, probably not in a HMD. I'm interacting with that via my mobile in the most part. And, the proliferation of mobile devices, we've all got them. And we've all got access to a layer of the metaverse. So I think the multimodality and interoperability is a really key point that's going to drive adoption. And there's a destigmatization of people entering the metaverse in different ways now, even with lawyers becoming cats accidentally for appearances in court. For me, that's a really amazing example of the metaverse. And he said something really cool, actually. He said it's a Texan phrase. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. And so I think we're finding that people are entering the metaverse in small little ways via Zoom, checking out AR on their mobile device, potentially, and we are probably of the subset of people who do more of this, stick a headset on and let's have a virtual event. And we're working on something that I can't talk too much about with big tech company at the moment, which is really focused on how do we bring people into a virtual event, a virtual conference, a gig, from different access points, from desktop, from mobile, from in MR, in VR, and interoperability. Just to wrap up on that term, I think is really important when we think about who is going to be owning the metaverse. Nobody should own it, but all of the big tech players will try to have their version. It's a bit like Android and iOS back in the day. It's really painful. I want to build an app. I have to build it twice. Maybe I had to build it 3 times when Microsoft was in the game with their operating system. So how do we get over that challenge for the metaverse? I want to be me, and I want it to work like the real world. So that's some challenges, but some exciting ones.
Absolutely. We are, I feel very lucky to be at this point in technology to be able to start playing in this space and try and help define it. More and more, I think the main thing, just as we come to the close of our session, is that the metaverse offers us quite a lot of hope and excitement to be able to create meaningful connections between people. And I think as we move forward into it, all of us here definitely will be holding on to create amazing content for human beings to experience and be participant. And we're going to try our best to keep out some of the things that, in our real world are, make our lives more difficult. We want people to be open. We want to include diversity. We want the world to be there. And I think with this digital environment, I think we can get there. So thank you, Niall, Daniel, Tracy, for this conversation. We know we could talk for hours on this subject. We haven't even talked about pervasive AR or open standard or digital nations. But maybe we'll get to those on the next one. But thank you all for joining me this morning. We'll catch you guys again soon.